Glad to be joining you all in person. We're going to talk about along the same lines, some practical lessons for recruiting Hispanic respondents to probability-based panels. Let's start with a quick primer on the Gallup panel. The Gallup panel is a nationally representative probability-based panel of about 100,000 members. We recruit using both address-based sampling and random digit dial techniques. We do mostly web surveys, but we also have about 20,000 members who do not use the internet and prefer to be reached in other ways. We mainly conduct mail surveys with that population, but we can reach our members through telephone surveys as well as SMS for those who have consented. As noted, we use our RDD and address-based sampling techniques in a number of ways. These can be standalone recruit efforts, add-ons to other surveys, and other things that we're still evolving over time. As many of you, we're constantly experimenting with the best ways to recruit members and conduct several experiments every year to vary aspects of our visual design, our sampling approaches, non-response follow-ups, and incentive designs. This is a quick sneak peek at one of our recent recruitment brochures, obviously folded up neatly into a nice little package for our members. So as noted, we have some of the same goals as you all. We're always doing these experiments with a couple of things in mind. One is efficiency, primarily cost efficiency, because there's always a bottom line. The other is making sure we're reaching the right people and bringing the right people into our panel. So we're thinking a lot about those hard to reach groups, same groups we've been talking about, racial and ethnic minorities, our younger respondents, right-leaning respondents, and we think about each year who these people are and how we can best reach them. Let's focus a little bit in on this Hispanic American group. We know that this is the largest racial ethnic minority, aside from obviously white and Caucasian Americans, in the United States, set to grow to about 25% of the population by 2060. We need to reach these people. We need to make sure that they're part of our panels in the correct proportions. But historically, these groups are harder to reach with our recruitments. They're less likely to respond to surveys, including recruitment efforts, and have higher attrition rates overall. This means that making sure we have enough Hispanic American recruits is a constant turnover challenge, and we are expending time, effort, and money to make sure that we are continuously replacing our Hispanic American recruits into our panel. So let's talk about some ways over the past year or so that we've been thinking about how we can better increase our proportion of Hispanic respondents, thinking about our sampling approaches, the way in which we format our materials, our messaging on our materials, and the way in which we deliver our incentives. On a recent recruitment effort, we designed an ABS recruit to look actually like a typical ABS survey, and we added some recruitment questions, as you can see, just onto the end. The goal here is to think about this as kind of a foray into the survey experience that they're going to have. This should look and feel like taking a survey, and then we sideline them with the request to join the Gallup panel more long-term. As part of this recruitment, we did oversample households that were predicted to be Hispanic, and we varied the materials incentives in multiple different ways to see if there was ways that we could trigger a higher response rate and a higher recruitment turnover. Overall, we found that one of the most effective strategies we could use was the utilization of these sample flags. Again, those are the households predicted to be Hispanic. We found that about 63% of those in the households that were predicted to be Hispanic did in fact identify as being Hispanic. In relation, we had about 8% of those in the households not predicted to be Hispanic who were identifying as Hispanic. We also found that those in households predicted to be Hispanic were more likely to want to complete the surveys in Spanish compared to households that were not flagged. This was, in fact, the most effective thing that we found in terms of how we can improve our recruitment rates. This is something we found very consistently over time. As I mentioned, this recruitment was a little bit different, set up to look kind of like an ABS survey rather than a specific recruitment ask or pledge. But we have found this consistently depending on how we lay out our materials. Consistently, these sample flags are performing very well for us. We will say that those households that are flagged as Hispanic tend to return surveys and be recruited into the panel at a slightly lower rate overall. So think about your bottom line in terms of how many households you're planning to recruit and think about how you adjust your sample from there. We also did find, though, that we are recruiting about 8% of respondents from those households not flagged to be Hispanic are in fact identifying as Hispanic, which begs the question, are there differences between those who are recruited through these flagged households through versus not flagged households? Overall, we didn't find any significant differences between the Hispanic members we recruited through households flagged as Hispanic likely or those who are not flagged, but there were some differences that were slight. Obviously, here you can see a tendency for those households that are flagged to be of the lower education status and also more likely to be Democrat, a little bit less likely to be independent. Didn't see much of a difference in Republican identification overall. Bigger differences between those who completed the survey, who were Hispanic but completed the survey in English versus Hispanic and completed the survey in Spanish. Turning now to kind of a different way of looking at the methods for recruiting Hispanic respondents. Obviously, sample flags are just the beginning. Then we have to think about what we're delivering to each of these households. Again, we vary the materials in several different ways, thinking about how we can make it more convenient and accessible for different respondents to join the Gallup panel. Overall, we found that the materials didn't really make much of a difference when it came to recruiting Hispanic respondents specifically. This was a surprise to us because many of these different types of experiments have shown to be more effective in recruiting membership overall, but just were not selectively better at recruiting Hispanic respondents. So again, that would be things like whether we do mail pushed web or include a survey booklet, whether we're including a survey booklet in the first send versus the third send, thinking about the variation in language of materials as well. Speeding right along, one thing that we have found to be effective is how we think about how we present ourselves to potential recruits based on the messaging that we use. We did a separate recruit about a year ago where we varied the data presented in the recruitment brochure. We found that we could vary between a politics message or an immigration message, and Hispanic respondents were more receptive when we included the immigration messaging. Finally, we've done some experimentation with how we present our incentives in these ABS recruits. One thing that we found that is effective overall is, in addition to showing a visible cash incentive in our first send, sometimes we will include a final incentive in our last send of the recruit. Overall, this helps quite a bit. For Hispanic respondents, there was no specific effect there. How do these Hispanic panelists go on to become good panel members and stay engaged? Well, the jury is still out on this most recent recruit because it just happened in October, but so far we're seeing about 6 in 10 have completed their first Gallup survey, which is still slightly lower than what we're seeing for overall respondents. And yet we saw that a higher percentage were likely to consent to do our SMS option. So maybe we have some more opportunities to reach them in other ways with our surveys. A few quick takeaways here. One thing we noticed is obviously the tactics that were effective for recruiting membership overall were not necessarily specifically effective for Hispanic respondents. We also noted that there was things that were helpful for recruiting Spanish-speaking respondents and things that were effective for Hispanic respondents overall, and those were not necessarily always aligned. So think about your goals when you come to designing your materials. Few quick takeaways. As others have said, we found that ABS approaches have been much more cost efficient and effective at recruiting hard to reach populations, including Hispanic respondents. It's a little bit easier to target them that way. The sample flags are working. We're not concerned at this point about major differences between those in households flagged versus not flagged, but we'll continue to evaluate. We're continuing to experiment in other ways, as we said, and we'll continue to follow up on some of these experiments to dive into these areas in which we found those inconsistencies between overall effectiveness and less effectiveness for the Hispanic population specifically. One of those is thinking about when we send our surveys. Overall, again, we found no effect with our materials experiments, but in general, we find that it's more effective to send our survey with the first send than waiting later on. There's really no efficiency or cost benefit gained from that. Speeding right along, as I said, we are continuing to experiment and some of the ways that we're going to be diving into these in the next year, continuing to think about how we reach these diverse respondents and ensuring that we have representativeness within that Hispanic population across some of these additional hard to reach groups, and thinking about more flexible ways that we can recruit respondents, especially those who do not necessarily use email, and thinking about text messaging recruiting.
Thank you, Ellen.